Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first live stream of this run of Caring for Vulnerable Children. It's good to be with you. My name is Graham McPhee. I guess you probably already know that if you're 2 weeks into the course and you're watching this. So my name is Graham McPhee. I'm the lead educator on the Caring for Vulnerable Children course. So I'm delighted you can join us. So welcome if you are watching and engaging live, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. But I know that probably more people, when they access these, it's in their own time. So you're watching the recording of this afterwards. So thanks if you're doing that. Now, if you are watching and listening live, then we'd love it if you get any kind of interaction in real time. So if you've got any questions that you would like to ask, or you've got any responses or comments to anything that I might say over the course of this session, then please use the chat function and use that to post comments and questions. And I'd love to hear from you. And I see somebody, Mary Fran, saying good morning. So thanks for using the chat function, Mary. So if anybody's got any comments or questions they want to post, then please do that there. So my name's Graham McPhee. I'm based at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow in Scotland. And I'm the lead educator on the programme. So you'll see and hear from me over the course of all 6 weeks. We do 3 of these live stream events. We do one at the end of week 2, week 4 and week 6. And this is a chance for us to kind of unpack some of the comments and questions that have been made over the course of the kind of 2 weeks prior to this. So these live sessions from run to run of the programme, because we deliver Caring for Vulnerable Children 2 or 3 times a year, these sessions are never always the same in a sense, because the questions that are being asked, the comments that are being posted on various steps of the course are always different, and that's the case here as well. So I look forward to kind of hopefully what you'll find an interesting chat over the next 30 minutes or so. Obviously, what I can't do is respond to absolutely every comment that's been posted. I'll say just a little bit about numbers, because we've got a kind of really healthy cohort of you kind of working on this together this time. So I'm just kind of pulling out some particular comments, some particular themes that we've noticed from the first 2 weeks. So kind of first things first, to kind of let you know that you're a big cohort, and you're a truly international cohort. We've got just short of 2,500 people so far registered on this run of the course. So really healthy numbers. The last time we checked, you came from 97 different countries. So I say, like, truly international, real international reach, which is really kind of interesting and stimulating for us in terms of people bringing different perspectives and cultural lenses to some of the discussions that we're having. Now, within those 97 countries that are represented, unsurprisingly, kind of the vast majority are from the UK. And I say unsurprisingly because we are a university that's based in Scotland and the UK. So I think in the first instance, we're more likely to see people register on the programme from there. So the UK represents about just over 3/4 of the people that are registered on the course. But beyond that, we have big populations from Canada, Australia, Ireland, the USA, South Africa, Nigeria, India, and then I could list 97 countries. There's other whole range: Pakistan, Brazil, Peru, Russia, Mexico. The list goes on. What I always enjoy about delivering this course and being part of this that's part of this process is that the people who take part in Caring for Vulnerable Children course tend to be very sociable. And what I mean by that is that doing a course such as this, that they're often referred to as MOOCs, massive open online courses. We see a lot of people but what we know in the industry is a lot of people sign up for MOOCs and they participate quietly. And by that I mean that they register and they go through the material on a week-to-week basis, but they don't necessarily post comments or ask questions or interact with other people. That's typically not the case for caring for vulnerable children, and it's certainly not the case for this run. So currently, just now, our social learning percentage, and that means how many people are actually active in posting and commenting, it's just under 50%. So we've got really high numbers in terms of kind of people posting comments, responding to each other, having conversations, and that's one of the really kind of healthy aspects of our program. So please keep that continuing over the next for 6 weeks in total. And just to respond to kind of one question that I've seen come up there from Mary, and she asked, do we receive any feedback on the discussion topics we've completed? Mary, what we can't do, we kind of hear about, we've already had over, we're just short of 4,200 comments posted. So the way the course is designed, there's no kind of individual feedback. But what these sessions are doing is picking up on some of the main themes and topics that are being presented across different contributions, and then asking. And then kind of responding to them, having a bit of a kind of further discussion. And then I would imagine after this session, when we post the link to this video on the course page, and that in turn might stimulate more discussion. And that's what we want. That's what we want to happen in terms of that kind of discussing the issues that we're thinking about. So in terms of that's by way of an introduction. So in terms of the kind of content that I'd like to kind of focus on today, there are a couple of things in particular. One is, in week 1, you had a poll to think about. We gave you 10 very short scenarios, and we asked you to pick the 3 where you thought there was the most evidence of kind of risk or vulnerability, and say why. So if you haven't already looked on that page in week 1, the results have been posted in terms of the percentage results, in terms of how many different people picked each scenario. And there's some text from myself in terms of a response to that. I'm going to talk about that a bit further, because there's some interesting things in there for us to think about. So we're going to do that. Secondly, we're going to talk a little bit about Billy's story, because now we're obviously 2 weeks into Billy's story, and just talk about some of the themes and issues that we see present within Billy's story, and certainly some of the themes and issues that have prompted some comments and questions from yourself. So again, that's quite interesting. And then thirdly, there's some specific questions, because we invite you to post questions in advance of these sorts of sessions, and people have posted questions. So I've got a couple of questions that I pulled out that I'm going to respond to, and interestingly, or I guess perhaps not surprisingly, given the focus of week 2, which is about which is a kind of a strong focus on attachment, that we've got a group of questions that have all got an attachment feel to them, so we'll have a bit of discussion about that. So these are some of the things that we're thinking about over the next 30 minutes or so. So where I'm going to start is just the response to the poll in terms of kind of rating risk and vulnerability. So if you remember, in week 1, we gave you 10, I mean, I say very small scenarios. I mean, that's absolutely very small. They were all a sentence long. And it's probably just worth saying at the outset, this sort of it's an academic exercise in many ways. It's week 1. We're thinking about risk and vulnerability. Let's do a quick exercise to get us to begin to think about risk and vulnerability, and kind of what constitutes risk and vulnerability in the context of vulnerable children, and kind of what are some of the factors that we need to think about. Any sort of kind of professional, especially a kind of social worker or any other kind of childcare professional involved in responding to situations such as this, would be working with much more information and much more complexity. We've asked you to work with 10 sentences effectively, but nonetheless, it's a useful exercise for us to think about. So what do we see in the results? Well, we gave you the 10 scenarios. We asked you to pick the 3 that you thought where there was the most heightened risk and vulnerability. And guess what's interesting straight away? Out of those 10 scenarios, 4 of them got far more results than the others. So 4 of them were between 50 and 57% of you selected them, and one of them actually had 77% of you selected it. And then after that, a lot of the other scenarios were getting a whole lot less votes, and some of them being as low as 2% or 1%. So let's first of all kind of focus on the scenarios that generated the most votes that selected. We're selecting most and kind of try to think out, kind of what do we think is prompting that? Well, the scenario that got by far the most votes was scenario 1. 77% of you selected this. A tiny baby who's been given a violent shaking by their carer, who has learning difficulties and upset because the baby won't stop crying. So when we look at the comments and some people explaining why they were selecting this, unsurprisingly, we've got a tiny baby, so we've got a baby who is completely 100% dependent on their caregiver. That's the only way they're going to have their care needs met, and their caregiver. And what information we've got about their caregiver, we're told they have learning difficulties. We're not given any more information than that, other in terms of kind of how complex or what impact that might have, but nonetheless we're told about learning difficulties, and they are violently shaking the baby because it won't stop crying. And so we'll get imminent risk of harm, and possibly pointing towards a lack of understanding of kind of the impact that might have on the baby, or kind of how to interpret the crying, how to respond to it. So, and in some ways, actually, perhaps the bigger surprise is that it only got 77% of the votes, because when you think about the imminent risk that is potentially here, then it's not surprising that it's top of the list. So that got 77%. Move one down, the next most selected scenario was scenario 4. It got 57%. So we've got a 6-month-old baby boy. So again, what we've got in common is a very young child. It's a baby who is, again, completely dependent on their caregivers, and we're told they've not been given any attention or had anything to eat for 10 hours. And so more than half of you kind of saying this points towards some real risk and vulnerability. Now, what we don't know is what's the reason behind that, in terms of kind of why there's not been any attention or anything to eat for 10 hours, and what are the, if I call it, the normal patterns and rhythms for this child. But nonetheless, this feels significant enough in terms of kind of risk and vulnerability that 57% of you have selected that, and that's not unsurprising either. So we've got a tiny baby, we've got a 6-month-old, and then actually the third scenario, or the third most selected scenario, again, was a relatively young child. It was a 4-year-old girl, so obviously a little bit older, with a little bit more kind of agency, but still nonetheless very young, kind of very vulnerable. And the scenario here is a 4-year-old girl who's a mother who's suffering from depression and who has not fed her for 24 hours. And again, reiterating the point I made at the start, that any social worker, childcare professional involved in this, in assessing a situation, would be dealing with kind of far more information, far more kind of complexity and nuance, rather than the 3 lines of a sentence that you've been given here. But this has been ringing enough alarm bells for you that 54% of you selected that. So what's interesting straight away is that the 3 scenarios that got the most votes, and the most votes by some distance, were all very young children whose care needs are completely dependent upon the caregivers, be it parents or other carers round about them. Interestingly, the fourth scenario, beyond that, is kind of slightly different, in the sense that it's a 15-year-old, so it was scenario 3. And what you're told here is a 15-year-old girl who has recently been befriended by a man who has persuaded her to do sexual things to him in exchange for money and affection. And so bang on half of you, 50% of you, selected this scenario as well. So whilst we've got an older girl, so older, certainly by comparison to the first three scenarios that we mentioned there, so quite a bit older than them. A lot of concern about vulnerability, about power, the misuse of power, about abuse, and we're told it's a man, so it's kind of somebody with a kind of unequal relationship here, and this abuse of power, and whether it's physical or sexual abuse, has persuaded her to do sexual things to him in exchange for money, and affection. And again, in this sense, when we begin to unpick that scenario, we could conclude, I wonder if more than 50% of that, you might have selected that, but surely that's us spoken about 4, and you only had 3 choices. So if you'd already thought the first 3 were very risky and vulnerable, then no, we've asked you only to pick 3. And then I did say at the beginning, this is an academic exercise, and it's about, I guess, the purpose of doing an exercise such as this is just begin to prompt us to kind of step back and begin to think about, right, what constitutes risk, what constitutes vulnerability, and what are the different factors that we might need to think about. Now, I would hope that in kind of practice situation, we've got enough professionals and we've got enough resources to deal with each situation on its merits, and workers, no, certainly we don't have a scenario where workers are given 10 cases and pick the 3 that you're going to work with. But we know in many situations that many organisations have got limited resources. And actually, if we look at the kind of situation and some of the challenges that are present all around the world just now over the last year that we've had, and the kind of challenges and circumstances created by coronavirus, then I think it's probably fair to say that more organisations are having to make more hard choices about where they intervene, where they direct resources, and where they think they can do things. So this issue of kind of what we pick to focus on and what we don't pick to focus on, sadly, probably does have a practice relevant in some situations. But so if you haven't been on the page and seen the results, I would say go back to week 1, click back on the page, look at the results, how people voted. Look at the comments that I've posted about that after that, and then if you've got any further comments or discussion, then add them to the discussion thread, because that was an interesting exercise for us to think about in week 1. Want to move on to Billy's story, and it's not completely unconnected to the last thing that I said there in terms of one of the themes that I want to pick up on. So we're 2 weeks into the programme now, so you've got essentially we've got Billy's story, which runs throughout the 6 weeks of the programme. So it's worth saying up front that no, Billy's story is obviously a fictional story. I know Billy, and none of these people are real. But we would suggest that the way we created Billy's story is real in the sense that it reflects many of the circumstances and challenges that many children, young people and families will be facing, not just in Scotland, but across the UK and in other parts of the world. And perhaps I would go so far as to say I think some of the themes that are present within Billy's stories have really been exaggerated in some ways by what's happened over the last 11 or 12 months, and kind of the challenges that have been created for many families in terms of access to resources and different support mechanisms and such like. So whilst this is not a real case, Billy's not a real child or a real person, the themes are very present for a number of families all around the world. And again, that's another point I would like to emphasise. Also, Billy's story is we're a Scottish university based in Scotland, so and Billy's story is based there. I said at the beginning about us having an international audience, 97 different countries represented in our cohort. What I'd be prompting everybody to think about is the themes and issues that are present either in Billy's story or actually the themes and issues that are present in any of our discussions that we're having. How do these themes and issues play out in your country, in your setting? Because there are obvious kind of some international and some cultural context and differences in terms of kind of the way different services are organised, or kind of some societal norms and different things about kind of different roles, kind of family structures, that kind of whole kind of range of kind of different things. So I would be including that, encouraging everybody to not just look at Billy's story for what it is in its Scottish UK context, but to think about, right, how do some of these themes play out within where I am, and within my setting. So you've been introduced to Billy. You've been introduced to kind of Billy's immediate kind of family situation, and after week 2, where you got a bit more of the story, and I guess the main elements that you were beginning to develop more of during week 2 was about Billy's immediate family context in terms of having his relationship with his mum, but that being challenged in some way by mum's own kind of mental health issues and her own health needs. We had his dad was introduced, and you get a sense of kind of how that relationship functioned and some of the challenges that were present for Billy within that. You also introduced the fact that Billy, in terms of his own kind of peer relationships, about there perhaps not being as much of that present as we might like or wish for a child of Billy's age, and then perhaps kind of feeling a bit isolated in a sense, or potentially being isolated in a sense. But in a more positive then, just at the end of the material in week 2, we were introduced to the fact that he did have something that appeared to be positive and supportive for him, and that was about the relationship he had developed with a particular teacher at his school, who was taking a bit of time with him to kind of just offer him some space and the ability to talk about and reflect on a few things. And I guess it was interesting that a number of you commented on that specifically when in the forum related to Billy's story about, and I didn't know that the question you were asked in week 2 was, having found out this material in week 2, are you more worried or less worried about Billy than you were after week 1? And I think it's probably kind of fair to say, on the balance of comments, we had more people saying they were more worried, but there were a number of people picking up on the fact that I'm really glad he's got that support mechanism at school. That feels like that is really important for him, and as that's something that could be very kind of beneficial for him. But equally, a number of you making comments about some of the bits that seemed a bit more difficult or challenging, be it what was going on with mum and dad, or the more kind of social isolation within his community, and a bit of kind of lack of evidence of more kind of friendships with children of his own age, and how that might present some challenges to him. So we kind of see the kind of range of different comments being posted. I just want to pick up on a couple of questions that were asked on the back of that. So one, had a question posted by Annabelle W. So Annabelle, you don't get your second name, but Annabelle W. So Annabelle, thank you for posting your comment. And I'm just going to read out a bit of Annabelle's comment and question. She said, it's clear in Billy's case that his mum genuinely loves and cares for him and tries her best to provide a stable and loving home. However, due to her mental illness, this can sometimes leave her unable to do so. Absolutely. And then you ask, do you feel adult mental health services are adequate in Scotland? And I saw that, oh my goodness, I could speak about this for the whole session, and I could probably go off on a bit of a political rant as well, but I'll save you that. I think my response to that in the first instance, Annabelle, is I think we could definitely do more. Whilst I think we've made great strides, especially in terms of kind of recognition of mental health as an issue and thinking about how we respond to that in terms of services, but also society. It's in terms of societal responses, in terms of trying to kind of challenge and break down some of the stigma that exists about mental health. And whilst I think we've got a whole lot better in that regard as a society, I think we've still got a number of challenges to overcome in terms of to absolutely remove that stigma. And I think in the context of Billy's story, and certainly what you've had, because I know what's coming in Billy's story, I want to make sure I don't give away any kind of spoilers here in terms of what you've seen so far for week 2. So you asked the question about are adult mental health services adequate in Scotland? And linking that to what you said, the first bit about mums genuine care and love for Billy. So you're already beginning to see a pattern of, if we want to support Billy, then possibly one of the best ways of doing that would be to support and care for mum. Because if we help mum be in a better place and manage her health and mental health and emotional well-being better, then that might put her in a better place in terms of how she can be and interact with Billy. So that this very connected notion of the best way to perhaps support and respond to Billy is to support the wider family network, because you're only going to say, like, removing a child from home would be a last resort, and absolutely that would be that would be the case. So if we want to do anything that's going to support the family structure and setting, then trying to, and it's not to say that everything would be focused on mum at the expense of Billy, kind of far from it. But if all we do is focus on Billy and don't do anything to support mum, then are we really going to impact any kind of long-term change within that? Within that situation? So there's a very connected bit here, and then linking this back to a comment I made previously about organisations having to make choices about where the direct resources. I think we quite often at this point in the programme will see people making comments that go a bit further than yours, actually saying social worker, somebody needs to get involved and they need to support mum. This needs to become a priority. That's the best way to support Billy. And I would say, sadly, I think kind of part of the reality just now in terms of resources and the availability of resources and how things are prioritised. And here I'm linking back to that exercise about you've got 10 scenarios, pick 3 that you think are most vulnerable. And I can see various comments in the chat that have come up about people saying, I find it really difficult to pick 3 because they've all got needs within them. They've all got kind of risk and vulnerability. And when we take that into the context of Billy's story, for many organisations, for families such as Billy's, sadly, we might come to the conclusion that Billy and his family would really benefit from an input, but in terms of priorities, in terms of the amount of resources that organisations and especially in a Scottish context, statutory social work organisations have got to deliver to communities, then sadly, I think, just bluntly, families like Billy at this point are going to be quite low down the pecking order, because there's going to be far more families and far more individuals with far more immediate acute needs and risks and vulnerabilities that need to be responded to. And these are some of the difficult challenges that organisations are having to make just now. So what I would ask people to do is, obviously Billy's story is going to continue over the next 4 weeks. There's 6 weeks of it in total. So please keep following Billy's story, keep posting comments about it, and again we will talk about it again in week 4 and week 6. Now, for the last 10 minutes or so, I kind of started with poll, then moved on to Billy's story. I'd like to respond to some particular questions that have been posted in advance of the live stream today. So kind of thanks for doing that, and I guess just kind of one other thing I'd like to do just before I go a bit further as well, because it's evident from a lot of the comments and posts that we're seeing in this particular run that we appear to have a kind of quite sizable group or cohort of foster carers and also kind of teachers in this run, in this setting. So it's fantastic. We've got so many people, kind of full stop, but it's fantastic also that we've got those communities of professionals present in the cohort, and it's been really interesting to follow the different kind of conversations and threads of that within the post. So please keep posting and keep those conversations going. So in terms of kind of some particular questions that we got, and also in week 2, so the second week of material, the title of week 2 goes by attachment and child development, and most of the material in week 2 kind of has got that focus to it, and that's prompted a few questions around those themes. So we'll pulled out a kind of couple of questions that are kind of linked to this. I'm going to kind of try and mesh a few of these together to answer them. So I'm going to kind of start with Jetta Becker. So Jetta, thanks for your question. So Jetta asked, is attachment formed in the womb? So Jetta, most research would suggest that, yeah, absolutely, that there's something going on with unborn babies in the mother's wombs, and that a process starts. It will sometimes be referred to as prenatal attachment, but obviously it takes on a very new and different form after the baby is born. So Jetta, the short answer to your question is, yeah, things are beginning to start there. So if we keep that in mind whilst we think about a further question and a response to that. So Najreen Kadwa. So Najreen, thanks for your comment, thanks for your question. She asks about attachment and what impact, and you use the phrase a mum who has been abused, and you ask, does the abuse affect unborn child, or does it affect the child's behaviour and attachment later on? So now your phrase there, a mum who's been abused, I guess that could be that phrase could cover a number of instances and different behaviours. But if we talk more generally about what do we know, what does research and science tell us about the impact on children on the womb when mothers are being subject to any sort of abuse, any sort of harm, even and stress, being subject to a number of things. And I guess I'm talking here in things that the pregnant mother has been subject to themselves. Obviously, there's a lot of science and research as well about what impact does it have on the unborn child. Activities such as alcohol, drugs, smoking, etc. The upshot is that all these things can and do impact on the growth and development of the child in the womb, and we know that when the child in the womb is subject to more stress or the impact of alcohol, drugs, etc., then absolutely, when the child is born, it can have an impact on the child's growth. It can have an impact on the child's development, or even before we get there, it can increase the risk of things like miscarriage. Obviously, it can increase the link of premature birth, and then it can lead to, or it could possibly lead into such things as low birth weight, infection, physical injury to the baby. And the thing about so when the baby is born, if it's instantly placed in a situation where it's got more acute needs in that sense, then in terms of the challenge of caring for that child and being able to respond to them, and the impact that all has on attachment, form and developing behaviours. And I see Lisa using the phrase kind of fetal alcohol syndrome, so that'd be kind of one of the things that we might be talking about within this scenario. Then all of that can impact on the child in the womb, can then follows through into birth, and then it begins to have an impact on the interactions between the child and their carers. So the question asking specifically, what impact does this have? Well, it can have a severely detrimental impact on the child's physical development, the child's emotional development, and that in turn can have an impact on the interactions in between child and parent or child and carer, and how things develop from there. So, and linking this back to Jetta's question about is attachment formed in the womb, well, a process starts there. It obviously takes on a new life when the child is actually born. But if the child is born experiencing different health issues, different care issues, then that presents more challenges in terms of those attachments being formed, because essentially there's more adversity, there's more barriers to be overcome. So impact on the impact on children. Now, I'm getting my words muddled here, so let me tell you that I've been talking a long time without taking a drink here. Let me just get a breath. Pardon me. I'll order my words in the right order now. So, pregnant mothers, the impact on the growth and development of their children in the womb. Science and research absolutely tells us, yes, the development of the child is affected by abuse and potentially a number of other things. And this can all then lead through into physical impact, emotional impact for the child when it's born. And then that then can play out in a range of different challenges and difficulties when it comes to attachment forming behaviours between the child and the parent. So it is absolutely kind of all linked. And I want to move that onto a further question we got from James Seymour, asking about how long does it take for a newborn to attach to its birth mother? Well, that can absolutely vary. But if we just think about if some of these difficult circumstances that we just mentioned, then it can become far more challenging, and it can become a far more potentially elongated process, and one that's harder to achieve. And the challenges that are kind of presented here, but there wouldn't necessarily be an exact kind of timeline with on that, James. But you then go on to ask about you say that if no attachment is made with a birth mother, you say for whatever reason, and say a newborn child is attached with a foster parent at some point, and then baby returns to live with the birth parent, will the baby be able to attach? Well, that's not just a kind of a yes or no answer, but what do we know about that? What does research tell us about that? Well, I guess the younger and earlier a child is placed with long-term parents, the more chance or the more likelihood there is of stable attachment forming behaviours and positive attachment development styles emerging. So thus then, if children develop those attachment behaviours and those attachment styles, and children then move from one setting to another, does it guarantee attachments and relationships? Well, it doesn't guarantee, but it makes it far more likely in a sense, because they've developed that sense of safety and security and positive attachment development styles that gives them that sense of security and curiosity about the world, and that stands them a better fighting chance in a different setting. Whereas a child who is already experiencing difficulty in relation to attachment forming behaviour and relationships, moving them from one setting to another, then logically that they're going to find that process more challenging. And actually, if I saw a couple of comments from people who were working in what we might refer to as kind of residential childcare settings, and that was my practice background. Before I came to university, worked for 10 years in residential childcare. And I worked both in a unit that, in the first instance, was with primary age children. So in a Scottish context, that would be, typically the children we were working with there were between the ages of maybe 8 to 12. I worked there for about 5 years, and then I moved to an adolescent setting, and typically the children there were between kind of 14 and 18. But one of the kind of common patterns that I saw, regardless of whether I was working in the primary age unit or the adolescent unit, was that the majority of these children, they had a lot of things in common, effectively. And one of the things that they often had in common was, sadly, when you saw their case files, was such a long list of placements, and what you saw was a pattern, especially when we got to adolescence, of children struggling to settle, to feel safe, to be able to form relationships, to allow them to safely live in those settings, and then sometimes that would play out in more extreme ways in terms of kind of beginning to test things out, and sometimes their behaviour and the challenges it presented, getting to a point wherever their previous placements were, so it might have been another residential unit, it might have been a foster type setting, sometimes it was a residential school, but leading to the assessment that this doesn't feel like a good, safe fit anymore, and another placement move would come, and that was another set of kind of separation and loss, and that was whatever relationships had been developed there were often ended as the child was moved and brought somewhere else, and that process to start again. And certainly for many of the adolescents, the begin to see kind of young people kind of sadly almost beginning to internalize some of this, and thinking that I'm not going to put myself out there and make myself vulnerable in terms of kind of trying to put roots down and make relationships and whatever, because I know how this story goes, because I've been through this process however kind of so many times, and actually almost like that, almost that a notion of I'm going to get my retaliation in first before they come, because they become so ingrained about the kind of whole process, and this notion of I'm going to be rejected again, because for many of the young people that would be how, sadly, that would be how they internalised it. And I guess the link I'm making here to kind of some of the questions that have been asked here, and whether we were working with 10-year-olds or 14-year-olds or 16-year-olds, when you do any sort of analysis of the histories and case files of those young people that we were looking with at that time, and linking this to notions of attachment and attachment forming behaviours. And obviously we're dealing with paper at this point, we're dealing with reports, so we're often going back 15 years or so, so we always didn't know for definite what had happened in those early years. But I think what we could do is we could fairly confidently speculate that in terms of some of the things that you were hearing about in the material this week, about what we would like to provide children, or what is best for us to be providing children and young people in those initial stages of childhood, in terms of consistency of care, and in terms of kind of young babies grown up in a way where healthy attachment forming behaviours are developed because they feel a sense of safety and security. They see and feel and experience their needs and their cues being responded to, and their needs being met, and they develop that strong sense of self. They develop a stronger sense of security, and that puts them in a better place for effectively dealing with and interacting with the world. And the common theme for the vast majority of children and young people that I worked with in those residential childcare settings was that a lot of that, or parts of that, hadn't happened. Now, it's not to say that everything in their early childhood been negative. Absolutely kind of far from it. That there may well have been a whole variety of kind of positive things happening at that point in time, but the bits that were missing and the challenges that were had such a profound impact upon them that in terms of the way that they were then able to interact and respond with the caregivers and professionals in the different settings that they were in was kind of really challenged. And I would suggest that for some of the young people that I worked with, and perhaps we'll go into this maybe more in weeks 4 or week 6, I think the system, and by that, when I say the system, I'm not talking about here about individual placements. I'm talking about the whole kind of system response. I think in some ways the system almost did them a disservice, because when we were receiving, it's not uncommon for some young people to be placed, and they would have as much as 20 or 30 prior placements. And it's trying to understand that for a young person who's 15 and they're moving into their 20th placement, is it sometimes any surprise at all that they experience challenges and difficulties in terms of when people are saying to them, like, we want this to be a permanent or long-term setting for you, and this isn't going to be like all the other placements. We're absolutely going to claim you. You're going to stay with us. Actually, the way many of those young people responded would have been the only logical way to respond, which would have been, well, aye, right. And I'm sure it'd be, because actually the best indicator for me is what's happened previously, and this is the story, and I know how this goes. So I think sometimes the system has to, and we will get into this more in kind of weeks kind of 4 and 6, but that there's a huge connection between these early childhood experiences, and you'll get a bit more on this in week 3. I can safely say that without giving away too many spoilers. And certainly in terms of Billy's story, we think a wee bit more about early childhood experiences. But early childhood experiences, attachment, containment, how how young people grow in terms of their kind of sense of self and how they're able to interact with the world, and the role that they play, and then kind of how that plays on further down the line in relation to children such as kind of Billy's age. Now, I could keep talking. I realise I've already probably went about 5 minutes beyond where I intended to. I had in my head we would last about kind of 40 minutes or so. We've went a little bit longer than that. Thank you very much to everybody who's, well, first and foremost, thanks to very much for being a participant on the programme. Especially thanks to people that have kind of tuned in and live and been making comments, and also kind of posting comments and posting questions. We'll have another live session in 2 weeks' time. So again, you'll see the link for that in week 4. If you get any questions that you would like responded to, then please post there, and we'll we can't always respond to everything, but we'll pick out those that we can. And look after yourself, stay safe for the next 2 weeks, and we'll see you again at the same time on a Friday that I think it's the 12th. It's Friday the 12th of March, and it'll be the same time. It's 11 o'clock UK time, whatever that is for anybody else. And remember that if you can't tune in live, the recording will go up afterwards, and you'll be able to watch the YouTube afterwards. So thanks very much, and see you then. Thanks.